Hi, I'm Dr. Jonathan Moore. I'm the director of Clay Hill Memorial Forest, and this morning we are in our experimental pollinator garden at Clay Hill, and we have with us a former student of ours, Wade Pike, who helped establish this project back in 2020, and he's going to tell you more about it.
Hi there, I'm Wade Pike. I'm a former research assistant here at Clay Hill Memorial Forest, Campbell University. This here is our experimental setup for my undergraduate project. So the premise behind this is whenever you go to your local big box store, you're going to see all different types of plants. They're going to be all different types of colors, all different types of varieties. And the real question that we wanted to address here was, just because a plant is prettier or more showy, does it still have the same value to pollinators? So what we did was we set up 8 replicate blocks that has 8 plots in each block. We randomized the placement of these plants to take out any bias in our experimentation. So we selected 4 different plant species that we know hadn't been tested before. Those were Rudbeckia hirta, which is the black-eyed Susans. We did the blazing star, which is going to be the Liatris spicata. We did the swamp milkweed, which is Asclepias incarnata, as well as the Penstemon digitalis, which I think is the fox tongue, that plant. So with each one of these that we assessed, we knew that they hadn't been tested before for their contribution towards pollinator conservation as well as Kentucky native plant conservation. So the real question is, if all these plants that you find inside these big box stores, they're cultivated varieties of Kentucky native plants. So what we wanted to know was whether or not the pollinators were going to prefer the wild type plants versus the cultivated varieties of those plants. So as I said before, we randomized their placement within the blocks, and then I came out here and I did 5-minute observations randomly dispersed through the plants that were flowering to observe which different insects, based off we broke it down in about 8 different groups, mostly to the order level of taxonomic identification, to be able to try and determine if there was a significant difference in the overall diversity that any one given plant would have between the wild type and the cultivar. And we also wanted to address the question when it came to monarch butterflies, whether the wild type milkweed would be preferable over the cultivated variety of the milkweed. Because with the monarch butterfly caterpillars, one of the big things that we run into is that they are fairly host specific in the fact that they rely on milkweed as a significant contributor to their life history. And so in order to be able to try and look at how these plants that are very important to overall conservation of the species, so we wanted to try and include a little bit of that into the project. So what we did was we looked at oviposition preference, or where the monarch butterflies are laying eggs, and to do so about once every couple weeks we would come out and get a count on how many caterpillars we would find on each plant. And then we used that to quantify to find an actual mean to be able to see if there was a significant difference between the preference of the wild type versus the cultivar. So what we ended up finding was that our hypothesis was that in most cases, because this is based off previous research that we had cited inside the paper, was that in most cases the wild type plants were going to be preferable over the cultivated varieties. And the reasoning for this was due to the idea of coevolutionary factors, because where most of these pollinators around here are going to be native to this landscape and this environment, they're going to prefer the plants that would normally occur on these landscape types. And so going through and actually analyzing the data, we found that it's not always the case. Sometimes it's really dependent on the individual pollinator groups themselves. So in some cases, such as with the Rudbeckia, which is the black-eyed Susans, which you can see is this little yellow flower here, we actually found that native bees showed a significant preference for the Rudbeckia wild type versus the cultivar. But there's also a lot of things and other factors that have to be considered there as far as growing patterns, as the Rudbeckia hirta tended to be a lot more floriferous. They had a lot more flowers on each plant. and they tend to be a lot more robust compared to their cultivar, which had a lot more issues of trying to actually bloom and stay bloom for a prolonged period of time, and they didn't have as many flowers. So we also looked at, say, the liatris, the blazing star plant. We actually found that honeybees tended to have a preference towards the cultivar versus the wild type, which is interesting because it's contrary to our hypothesis that usually the native plants are always going to be preferred, but that's certainly not the case. And so because of this data, we were able to identify the fact that every single wild type and cultivar pair needs to be individually assessed for their contribution towards pollinator conservation, because it's not always going to be the case that wild types are preferred over cultivated varieties of the same plant. And this is very much the same as some of the background literature that we used also said that it's not always the case. Now, when it came to the milkweed plants and looking at the oviposition preference of monarch butterflies, we thought originally in our hypothesis that the wild type would be preferred over the cultivated variety, which we also found out we didn't really find a significant difference. So we had to reject our null hypothesis in believing that the wild type would be preferred mainly because of its taller growing pattern. We thought because it grew taller that generally it would be more noticeable to monarch butterflies who were looking to lay their eggs. But we actually found that there was really no significant difference between whether or not they preferred one over the other, which would actually indicate that if one were to be trying to grow a pollinator garden with in mind, trying to keep in mind that you want to do conservation of monarch butterflies, you could actually utilize either one and it wouldn't really have much of a difference as far as preference for the monarch butterflies for their egg laying behavior. And then the same could be said for, like I was saying, the individual assessment of each different wild type and cultivar pair. It really depends on which specific group of insects it is that you want to try and conserve as to whether or not you'll choose to utilize a wild type versus a cultivar of the same species.
So Wade Pike did a fantastic job getting this project set up for us, and actually we've continued to collect data with another student, Brandon Sherrill, throughout the 2021 growing season. And this project will continue on potentially, and we hope to continue to gather data and contribute to our understanding of native plant and pollinator conservation. But the general public, you guys are welcome to come by. Anyone's welcome to come by and see the project. It's really close to our parking lot, so come by and visit.